Alright, for this video, I want to talk about how I take an empty, once fired piece of brass, go through my reloading process, and end up with some precision ammo 223 that I shoot out of my AR-15. When I shoot my AR-15, I use a brass catcher. Catches all my brass while I shoot. It's not flying around. I don't have to pick it up off the ground. I will then empty my brass catcher into this bag, and I will transport it from the range back home. Once I get it home, I will then sort through my brass and throw it in some plastic baggies to keep it all organized. Here's some 223, as it's labeled here. This is federal stamped brass, and this needs to be processed. This is dirty. About halfway through the brass process, halfway through the process of an actual completed round, I put it into a bag, and this is 223 Federal prepped, and this is ready to be primed, powder, bullet, shoot. Them from the dirty bag after they've been organized, and I will put them into my reloading tray here. At this point, I will use some Hornady one-shot case lube. This stuff's real awesome. It works really well for me. I haven't had a stuck case yet. And I'll arrange them around in this tray. After I've coated these with lube, you're supposed to wait 1 minute to allow it to dry, and then they're ready to be resized and decapped, which means kick out your spent primer. What I use for that is just a standard set of Lee reloading dies. These ones are for 223 Remington because that's what I'm reloading. That pin right there is what punches out your primer. And then up in here, it's basically like a tight chamber for a rifle, and it will actually resize your fired brass down into specifications for what 223 should be to fit into chambers for most rifles. After I've resized and deprimed them, it's time to clean out your primer pockets. This one here on the left has a bunch of burned in residue, and this one on the right has actually been cleaned. And as you're going through your brass, be sure to keep an eye out. Right here, here's a good example of a cracked piece of brass. There's a long crack running along right there, so keep an eye out for that or any other abnormalities you'll find. The necks sometimes will crack, or down here you may have a bulged case. Here's the tool I use to clean my primer pockets. On one side it's small, on one side it's large. I will clamp onto the side that I'm not using with a drill and spin this around and clean out all my brass to speed it up. Then with 223, sometimes you'll come across a military crimp, which is a sharp edge around your primer pocket. In the factory rounds, these help keep water out and they help hold the primer in place. This is a military crimp remover. It's a little cutter, and once it cuts off the excess brass, it bottoms out against this flat piece. You won't overcut or anything. I also put this in my drill, and I'll just zip through as many as I need to. Now at this point, they're ready to be measured, and I have a case gauge right here. This is a great tool. What this does is it will measure from the distance of the shoulder that a 223 should be, and if your case is sticking out the back like this, your brass is stretched and it needs to be resized more, or it may be too old and it's time to throw it away. On the other end, if the mouth of the case is sticking out, which this one is, then it's time to be trimmed. This is a great way to measure cases quickly. It's a good way to check your head spacing, and that's what this does, is it should fall in between these lines right here. The center line, which is kind of a dark area, sits lower than these outer edges, and the brass should sit somewhere perfectly in between those two. Now, if your brass needs to be trimmed, Lee makes this great trimming kit. It's really inexpensive, and it's a great way to trim brass quickly. You throw this chuck in a drill, this piece right here, and then this is a shell holder. You can actually screw this all the way off and replace it with whatever one you need to hold your piece of brass. This is the cutter down at the bottom, and this shank that comes out right here is cartridge specific. This is the overall length that it's going to cut to. This needle drops down inside your brass and stops against the steel plate that goes into your drill. So you slide this into the neck of your case. As it spins, it will cut off the extra brass, and you'll know when it's run out of brass to cut. After you've trimmed it down, which it will cut to specification, then go ahead and take your chamfer deburring tool and run this around. I'll take this and just 3 firm, that much. I didn't put any pressure on right there, but that's all I do between all my pieces of brass. That's my trimming process and chamfer and deburring process. So at this point, the brass is prepped. So what I'm going to do at this point is throw them in my dry media tumbler. I use crushed walnut from Lyman. It's available in a jug. It's inexpensive. As you can see on these cases, in their mouths, there's a bunch of black charring from the powder that's been burned. And around their necks, they've got some also powder burn. They're just not real shiny, not real pretty. So I throw them in there, and when they come out, they're a lot better looking. Here's a dirty piece of brass. Here's a clean piece of brass. Notice it has much more sheen. There's not as many black markings around the case. And it's a great way to clean your brass for a lot less money than a wet tumbler. After I clean, I will throw them in those plastic baggies like I've shown. At which point, when I want to load some rounds, I will load up 50 in a tray that have already been prepped. And you can take your round, your cartridge casing, piece of brass, whatever you want to call it. Throw the appropriate shell holder in your press here. And then I prime from the press. So what that means is I'll just throw a bunch of primers out here. And then I will throw one right in there. And the press, as you squeeze this up, will prime your brass for you. I'm not actually going to prime this piece because it had a defect in it. But I will use a uniform amount of pressure each time I grab the handle like this and just try and squeeze it evenly. You don't want to kill it, just give it a nice good press in there. So here's my personal preference for weighing out each charge for my ammunition. I'll take a piece of brass, I will drop a funnel on top of it. These Lee Perfect powder measures work pretty well. Just cycle it up like that. I usually click it down twice and it will drop into this pan. I will throw that on my digital scale. It's a Frankfurt Arsenal. Use a Hornady trickler, get it up to the weight. I always try and throw just a little bit lighter than what my target weight is, so I can just trickle up maybe 2/10 of a grain. And then I'll take this guy, dump it into my shell. So once I have all my cases filled, I will take a pen flashlight and shine them down into the case mouths. These are all empty, but I will inspect my powder fill level to ensure that they've all been charged. Here's my bullet seating die. I've put a couple dots on here with a Sharpie, so it's easier to tell how much I've screwed this in or out as I go, in case you're just working on just a few thousandths. At this point, once you've ensured that you have a powder charge in your round, boat tail bullets usually sit down in the neck alright. This one's not going to want to hold it, but then you just run it up into your seating die. When you pull it back down, check your overall length. I use a set of digital calipers for that, and as long as they're in spec, they are ready to go. So now that you have a completed round, you have a few options. You can either label the entire lot that you just made, or if you're doing load development, you can write on the cases with Sharpie like I've done on this 243 piece here. This one has 45.5 grains. I know which powder's inside this. You can write how many grains of powder it has and which powder is in it. Or you can also keep notes on all sorts of things. Tumbling with the dry media will take this Sharpie off. Fair warning, silver metallic Sharpie, like right here, if you write on the cases, the dry tumbling media will not remove it completely and the dust will stick to wherever the lettering was. So you can keep your loads all organized like I've done here in this little plastic ammo carrying case, or you can take some spent ammunition cases. Some of them come with this plastic tray in the bottom, like this Fiocchi comes with a 50 round plastic tray. Or also, if you have a load figured out that you're not worried about getting mixed up, you can go ahead and just drop them into a bucket. This right here is a good load that I've worked up, and I've decided to go ahead and make some bulk with it. Now, of course, you could use any of these as loading blocks. Some old 9mm foam trays work excellent for a 223 case. They're very snug when they sit down in there, but they sit pretty close together. Also, this Fiocchi plastic tray works very well if you want to throw a few in here and keep things organized so you know which step of your brass prep you're going through, or your whole reloading process, or to transport it back to the range. I do try and keep my reloading area organized. I use this little nut and bolt bin here for different areas of case prep. This would be the mouth of the case, primer pocket tools, This will be a case gauge. I will be getting a 243 case gauge soon. And then your trimming center. I keep my digital scale in here just because it keeps it out of the way. And I keep all my other equipment that doesn't fit in here right next to it. Another thing I do with reloading is I try and keep my loading components separate from each other. I have my 223 components over here with some 223 data. I keep my powders near the cartridge that it belongs to. Over here I have my 243 stuff. Here's my 243 dies and all the components that go along with my 243. Keep them separate across the shelves. Perhaps something I have here is a little different than most people. My press is mounted to a steel plate, which is not mounted to anything. I can actually move this around, but if I'm pressing on it, all I do is take some extra steel pieces I have and counterbalance it, and you have to really torque down on this thing to get this plate to move. It weighs about 70 pounds. But if I need the workspace across my desk here, I can go ahead and set this on the floor and clean my rifles or do whatever I need to with them. Let's quick overview at the process I use to reload my 223 precision ammo. I go ahead and do all my case prep, and then I will store them until I'm ready to load up some rounds. They won't have any primers or anything in them. They just sit in the bag, and I try and keep all my head stamps separate from each other so I can pick if I just want to load something for 223 or use some 5.56 brass, whatever the case may be. And in the end, you end up with a completed round. All you have to do is prime, powder, bullet, overall length, label it, and you're ready to go hit the range. Hopefully you picked up on a few things I might do different from other people on YouTube. This is kind of just all a combination of things I've picked up across the internet. Hopefully you've learned a few things you could try. Everyone has their own system, and thanks for watching.